There are kingdoms the world has forgotten, not because they vanished, but because they learned to hide behind modern crowns. In the heart of contemporary Africa lies Edenra, a realm of contradictions, where marble palaces cast shadows over glass towers, where the chant of ancient priests echoes beneath the drone of aircraft. Here, kings wear Italian suits and ancestral beads on the same wrist. They sign contracts in boardrooms by day and whisper prayers to old gods by night. The world sees their smiles, charity galas, state dinners, televised unity. But beneath the silk and ceremony, power moves like a storm. The royal family of Obiri was loved and envied in equal measure. They were seen as the golden image of progress, graceful, philanthropic, unshaken. Yet behind those polished smiles were whispers of betrayal, secrets, and sins that could stain the throne forever. They said the crown of Edenra was blessed by the ancestors, that its power was divine. But even divine things can decay, when touched by human greed. This is not the story of a kingdom that fell to war. It is the story of one that crumbled from within. Edenra was a miracle of balance, a place where skyscrapers rose beside ancestral shrines, where elders still blessed the rain, and children learned history through both books and songs. At its heart stood King Adewale Obiri, the youngest ruler in the Edenra's history, a man who had brought unity to a people once divided by old rivalries. He was adored by his subjects, admired by presidents, and envied by monarchs across the continent. Under his rule, schools were built in villages forgotten by time, hospitals replaced able tents, and factories hummed with promise. The people called him Adewale the Rebuilder. Yet within his palace, the House of Ivory Gates, loyalty had become performance art. Smiles were polished for the cameras, but behind the lens, ambition stirred like a serpent in silk. His brothers and cousins bowed before him in daylight, yet sharpened their tongues and daggers under moonlight. In the court of Edenra, tradition was no longer sacred, it was strategy. Each ritual became a test of dominance. Each offering to the ancestors, a silent bargain for favor. And as the king's health began to falter, the air in the palace thickened with tension. The scent of incense and deceit became indistinguishable. The vultures began to circle, dressed not in feathers, but in royal regalia. Queen Omolara Obiri was elegance embodied, a woman whose smile could disarm critics and whose grace inspired songs among the people. Yet even queens bleed in silence. Behind her calm exterior, she carried a secret heavier than any crown. Her firstborn son, Prince Wale, the heir apparent, was not the king's blood. Before her marriage, Omolara had known love, a forbidden, intoxicating love with a man from a lower caste. He was a poet, a dreamer, a soul who saw her not as royalty, but as a woman. Their love, pure yet forbidden, ended in heartbreak when the palace discovered their affair. The poet disappeared, exiled to obscurity. And Omolara, shamed and silenced, was married to King Adewale, a political union meant to bind rival factions. But by then, she was already with child. The boy born from that love would become the crown prince of Edenra, unaware of his true lineage. Every day of her reign, Omolara lived with duality, public perfection, private guilt. She loved her husband deeply, yet every time she saw Wale standing beside him in royal robes, she felt the weight of her deception. Now, with the king's health failing and whispers of succession rising, that secret began to breathe again, restless and dangerous. She stood before her mirror at night, eyes hollow with fear, asking herself the question she had long avoided. Would I rather lose my crown, or my son? Prince Damilola Obiri, the king's second son, was the storm that no one saw coming. He was brilliant, calculative, and driven by an invisible fire. While Wale was loved by the people, Damilola was respected and feared. He believed the monarchy must evolve, that old customs were shackles, and only power mattered in a modern world. He studied the ways of politicians, understood the greed of businessmen, and built a network that stretched from the palace to the oil fields of the south. Behind his father's illness, he saw opportunity. He whispered to military officers, to ask to future alliances, and fed his ambitions with patience. In the dead of night, he often stood before the ancestral statue in the Hall of Kings, a bronze figure with eyes that seemed alive. And he would whisper, "In this age, the gods do not choose kings, men do." Thus began the quiet war for the throne, a war fought not with swords, but with secrets. Once every year, the kingdom of Edenra paused with life for the festival of the ancestors. It was the grandest event in the realm, a celebration of continuity, unity, and divine favor. The city streets bloomed with color, drums thundered like hearts, and the scent of roasted yam and frankincense filled the air. Foreign dignitaries arrived in shimmering cars, while villagers walked for miles to witness the royal procession. At the center of it all was the king, dressed in robes of white and gold, crowned with coral beads that gleamed under the sun. As he approached the ancestral altar to perform the sacred rite of continuity, the crowd fell silent. The priest chanted. The drums paused. But as the king raised the sacred kola knot, his hand trembled. His knees weakened. And before thousands, King Adewale Obiri collapsed. The crowd gasped. The fire dimmed. The high priest cried out, "The ancestors are displeased." By nightfall, the kingdom knew the king was alive, but trapped in a deep coma. The throne stood empty, and the whispers of destiny began to stir. Within the Grand Council Hall, beneath chandeliers shaped like crowns, gathered the elders, ministers, and bloodkin of the royal family. Their words were quoted in civility, but each sentence cut like a blade. The queen demanded that her son, Prince Wale, be named regent until the king's recovery. But Damilola's allies came prepared. They laid out their evidence like offerings to chaos, old photographs, letters, birth records, and the testimony of those who remembered Omolara's past. The revelation struck the room like lightning. Wale was not the king's true son. Omolara's tears fell silently as she denied the accusations, her voice cracking with rage and shame. But she saw it in their eyes, they knew. The very foundation of the crown had cracked. When the council dispersed, there was no unity left, only sides. The royal family had become a battlefield without swords. In the depths of the night, Queen Omolara ventured into the forbidden shrine of the Crimson River. The air was heavy with the scent of iron and earth as she approached the priestess. The old woman's eyes seemed to hold 1,000 secrets, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "Protect my son," Omolara begged, offering gold, jewels, and a lock of her own hair. Ensure his claim to the throne. The priestess nodded, her eyes glinting with a knowing light. The ritual comes at a cost, Your Majesty. Are you prepared to pay the price? Omolara hesitated, but her love for Ton overrode her doubts. I'll do whatever it takes. The priestess smiled, revealing crooked teeth. The shadows will claim what is theirs. The king's life force will be the catalyst. Your son's reign will be long, but at what cost? As the ritual began, the palace trembled. The wind howled like a chorus of restless spirits. Omolara felt a dark energy coursing through the air, responding to the priestess's chant. The ritual ended, and Omolara stumbled out of the shrine, her heart heavy with foreboding. She knew she had made a pact with forces beyond her control. The storm that followed was no ordinary tempest. It was as if the very fabric of the kingdom was unraveling, setting in motion the events that would lead to the downfall of the Obari dynasty. As Damalola's men closed in on Whale, Omolara summoned the ancient powers of the Shrine of the Crimson River. She called upon the spirits to protect her son and ensure his rightful place on the throne. Unseen and unfelt by the physical world, a spiritual battle raged. Turned, sensing his mother's desperation, focused his energy and willpower. The air was charged with an otherworldly energy as the two sides clashed. Damalola, unaware of the spiritual struggle, pressed his advantage. But Omolara's prayers and the ancient powers she had summoned began to take their toll. The king, already weakened by illness, felt a strange, creeping coldness spreading through his body. As the spiritual forces collided, the king's life force began to wane. His body, frail and exhausted, could no longer resist the darkness that had been unleashed. With a final, faint breath, the king's life slipped away, his body succumbing to the illness that had long been eating away at him. The palace erupted into chaos as news of the king's passing spread. Damalola's face remained impassive, but his eyes gleamed with a calculating intensity. Omolara's face was a mask of grief, but her eyes flashed with a fierce determination. Whale, meanwhile, stood frozen, his eyes fixed on his father's lifeless body. The spiritual battle may be over, but the war for the throne had only just begun. When the news of the death and the truth of Ton's ancestry finally reached the world, it spread like wildfire. The media feasted on it. Hashtags trended. Protesters filled the palace gates with chants for justice. Prince Damalola moved swiftly, his speeches fiery, his tone heroic. He promised a new era, free of lies and corruption. The army, hungry for order, backed him. Whale vanished into the shadows, his fate unknown. Omolora's palace became a tomb of silence. Her prayers turned to fury, her love into vengeance. She cursed the gods who had once crowned her queen. She had lost everything, her son, her husband, her throne. And Edenra stood divided, half mourning, half rejoicing. When the dust finally settled, Damalola stood as the new king, his reign marked by iron-fisted rule and ruthless suppression of dissent. Whale's disappearance remained a mystery, fueling whispers of rebellion and resistance. Omolara's fate was sealed, her legacy forever tied to the darkness that had consumed her. Years later, From the ruins of the Obari dynasty rose Princess Adizwa, the youngest of the royal bloodline. She was unlike her predecessors, soft-spoken but resolute, kind yet unyielding. She refused the throne of her ancestors, instead choosing to transform Edenra into a constitutional monarchy. She gave the people power, turned the palace into a museum, and replaced royal decrees with democracy. In her private chamber sat the melted crown, sealed in glass, untouchable, eternal. Each night she gazed upon it, not with pride, but with remembrance. She ruled through truth, not tradition. And though peace returned to Edenra, the crown reminded her of what was lost and what was learned. Time passed. Edenra became a new symbol, not of royalty, but of rebirth. Historians would one day write that the Obari dynasty fell not by sword or war, but by the corruption of its own heart. And yet, through ruin came wisdom. On moonlit nights, wanderers still claimed to hear drums echoing through the ruins of the palace, faint, haunting, and eternal. Some say they are the ancestors, still watching. Others say it is the sound of a kingdom reminding itself that every crown casts a shadow. And so ends the tale of the royal veil, a story of love twisted by power, of loyalty broken by greed, and of a nation reborn from its own ashes. Because in every age, and in every land, the true battle for the throne is never between kings, but within hearts.